Wow, what an incredible 5 days the Hindu Women's Festival 2021 has been. Welcome to the closing ceremony. I am so pleased to be joined by my fellow co-editor and editor-in-chief of the Beyond the Bindi anthology, Vibhuti Patel. Welcome, Vibhuti.
Hi, Vidhu. Nice to see you.
How amazing were the last 5 days?
Absolutely incredible. I'm completely taken aback by everything that we've seen and heard. It's been fantastic.
Right? We've had 33 panel discussions and immersive interactive workshops and masterclasses with over 65 thought leaders and speakers from around the world. We've engaged 24 organizations to come together to not only celebrate, but incubate the ideas, the Hindu ideas around femininity and womanhood. I'd just like to recap what our objectives were with this festival, because I think that's important. So as I've said, this incubate word is a really is a word that we really like to talk about Beyond the Bindi, because it's important that if you're going to see through a project, that you take some time to really understand it, to be able to do it with any integrity, right? So the main objective of this festival was to incubate Hindu ideas around femininity and womanhood, not parade or showcase what the Hindu worldview is and to say that this is the only way, but for us to really ring around the whole community, get us all together on a neutral platform to share these ideas, to really understand it, so that when we do then go to document this in the anthology later in the year, that we know that it's a very comprehensive view and that we've really taken the time to understand it. The other objective was to ask if there is a more sustainable approach to today's gender issues that we're experiencing, to the way that we organize society. Is there a more sustainable and flourishing, more fulfilling way for us to organize society than through that which feminism suggests? Are there answers in our indigenous Indian ideas and value systems that can help us with our modern day issues? We are, after all, the oldest living civilization with a deep and rich heritage. So Vib, I wanted to just put you on the spot. How many hours worth of content do you think we've created in the last 5 days?
Oh, see, I'm trying to do some really speedy maths now, because you said, okay, 33 sessions and this many, whatever. Our cooking session felt like about 5 hours and 5 minutes at the same time. I don't know, like 100 hours of content.
Oh God,
way under.
You've overstepped it. We've produced a whole day's worth of content.
Like a day, like 24 hours.
23 hours and 12 minutes and 6 seconds to be precise. And I'm sure that by the end of this session, we will have topped it up to a whole day. This is the type of content, with the weight of this content. This is the type of content that organizations can take many years to sit on and create and to do, but we've managed to.
Not that we're blowing our own trumpet or anything. It's pretty impressive.
No, I'm not taking credit for this. I'm saying that all of the contributors that have been involved in this,
I know,
have been so easy to collaborate with, and I think we've done a really good job at engaging the right people, engaging the people that have spent the time understanding these concepts. And I just think it's amazing that we've managed to create nearly 24 hours worth of content.
Yeah. And I just feel so grateful to all of those people for giving their time. And, for a lot of them sharing some really personal experiences in those conversations. It's been so valuable to have those kind of authentic viewpoints from people.
Yes, of course. I think it's really important that we take some time to recap each of the sessions. Now, as I said, there's 33, so we're not going to go into the ins and outs of them all, but they're all going to exist on the internet for as long as the internet is around. They're on YouTube at Hindu Women's Festival on the YouTube channel. You can access all sessions there. So let's start with, so we had the opening address, which was all about.
Which, can I just say, we should thank you for. You opened things up really well, and just set the tone for the festival. So thank you as one of our speakers for doing that, and just kicking everything off by asking us all to dare to be different, which was our festival.
the main theme of this whole festival was all about daring to be different, and not needing to be apologetic about the way that we see the world, but leaning into that which is different, that which those indigenous ideas that may not be so mainstream. Then we had a really exciting 3 panels on the first day. The first of which was led by Janviji Dadarkar and Drishti May, both of whom, you quite rightly pointed out, have been presidents of the National Hindu Students Forum and yourself during their time. So what was some of the key sort of takeaway points for you about that session?
I just think what really stood out for me around that was this idea of kind of diversity and sustainability are really embedded in dharmic values, in being a Hindu. And sometimes those things are actually just buzzwords in the corporate world, but we actually have like a philosophical system that has those principles at its core. So how do you transfer those? How do you transfer those principles from our cultural framework into leadership in the modern world? I found that really, really fascinating.
And they're not just saying it like in theory. They are both senior leaders and well respected in their own professional industries. And so they speak from lived experience, as well as understanding the Hindu worldview. So that was a really refreshing start to the entire festival. And
then I think there was a really good, there was a kind of nice transition to the next session, which was Suhag Shukla and Vipasha Surange talking about empowerment. I think there's a real connection there between this idea of leadership values, but also general empowerment for women.
And Suhagji joined us from across the pond from the Hindu American Foundation, and Vipasha was from Youth for Seva. And both of them, what I found really a candid approach from both of them was that they both were able to be quite honest about points in their experiences where they've had to check themselves. So Suhagji spoke about how she was at a dinner and with an investor, and the investor's wife was cooking in the kitchen, and how for a moment she thought, oh, poor wife. But actually she had to take a step back and think, no, why is she a poor wife? And Vipasha similarly in the Bastis in India was thinking that these women were really disempowered when actually they had full autonomy, providing for their families, working, fending for themselves. And so they had to both take a step back. And it really made me think that it's really not enough for us as Hindu women to just be like, oh, we're Hindu women, so we have an authority on this narrative. No, we also have to put in the work.
Well, because it comes back to the idea of diversity, like so embedded in our culture is this idea of diversity. And we have to keep that at the core of how we view each other as women as well.
And it's not just diversity in people, but it's diversity in thought as well, which I think is...
And diversity of choice.
Such a refreshing way of looking at things. And the final talk on the first day of the festival was between Pritesh Patel from the British Hindus platform and Sonal Sher, the director of the Jammu Kashmir Festival. And they spoke about Tantra.
Really a really misunderstood concept, and I will hold my hands up and say I didn't really understand much about it, and I learned a lot from this talk. So if you were anything like me and you missed this talk, go back and watch the video because it's really fascinating.
I think something that we do as second and third generation of the diaspora is that we will try and sometimes be like, oh, but rituals aren't important. It's all about the intention of doing things. But actually what Pritesh says is that there is so much value in the rituals as well. Don't just be so quick to be like, to just disregard the rituals because you thought a bit deeper in a more Vedic way about things. But actually there's a whole tantric way of looking at the world. And that does hold rituals and the practice to high value as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that real concept, again, not too many spoilers, go back and watch it if you missed it, but the idea that actually like masculine and feminine as balanced aspects are really key to that practice. It's really, really fascinating.
Yeah, of course. Then we moved on to day 2 of the festival. We had a lunchtime session with Manu Kajuria, the founder of the Voice of Dogras, and Rajiv Chandegra, Dr. Rajiv Chandegra, who is one of the editors of Tattva Press. And they spoke about Manu's upcoming book, Mountain Goddesses, which is all about how we as a community see God in Devi. We see godliness in the feminine, and some of those Devis who are commemorated through big yatras on these mountains. And I'm not sure if you've ever been there, but on our travels in India, we've been to like Chintapurni and Jwalaji, and it's such an experience, and Nena Devi and Vaishno Devi, and you're there and you're in the congregation and you're chanting Jai Mata Di, and it's just amazing. But what I think Rajiv brings to this conversation, which is something that we need to talk about more, is re-owning this concept of being a primitive culture and not taking that as something that is regressive.
Definitely. And I think so. I've worked with Manu quite closely on the book that is coming out later this year that she's been writing. And the thing that's really fascinating for me is her perspective of somebody from her particular region of India in Jammu. And like you say, something that just, has been swept aside as a primitive practice that takes place out there, which is the kind of this installation of like powerful female figures. Some of those are spiritual, some of those are actual historical figures, and how they're revered, and how just marking a place in a very simple way as an act towards that feminine power has just been kind of brushed away as this primitive practice, when actually it's this really incredible, empowering story about how women have been celebrated in that part of the world. So yes, please look out for Manu's book. Please go back and watch the talk, please. And then we went right from north, from Jammu to the south.
Yes, so we were joined by Nilima from the UK Telugu Hindu organization, and one of our very own Tattva members, Harsha, spoke with her about some of the practices in southern India, some of the rituals. And we know, as North Indians, we can say quite openly that the North was, through colonization and various invasions throughout the year, the North was colonized a lot more than the South. The South really managed to preserve its traditions, to preserve its history. And so I think as Northerners, there's a lot that we can learn from the South. So we had a few discussions throughout the festival that touched on Southern India, and I think there was a lot that people really gained from understanding how those rituals and traditions are still relevant to the community today, and how they've carried that. And they have what I really admire about a lot of the South Indian speakers that joined us on this session is that they have this real unapologeticness about themselves and about their practices and about their identity. So it was really refreshing to see.
I think that's something that us as well, we're Northerners in the Indian sense, but obviously very much Southerners in the British sense. But I think there's a lot that we as North Indians can learn, I think, from some of the way that our, Hindus in the South have really held on to their traditions and practices. So that was really great to hear about. And then we moved on to music.
Yes, music. We heard from Amitaji Ravikaran, who spoke to us about how folk songs, there's a dog in the back.
I'm just glad it's your pet for once and not mine. Crashing. Cool.
She's just etching to join the conversation. Spoke about how folk songs were passed down through generations. It was like an oral tradition, and how and all the different meanings behind folk songs of the feminine. That was a really interesting one, because I think often, especially when we go to like kirtans and bhajans and stuff, we'll sit there. And I can't speak for anyone, but I feel we don't necessarily take the time to think about what the meanings behind some of these lyrics are. And so that was a really enlightening session on what some of those meanings are, and expressions, and how they're used and what they convey.
Yeah,
So,
and how I think also that idea of oral tradition and why it's so important in terms of creating links between generations, you know, and continuing traditions and passing those stories down through song orally, because they're not done in any other way.
And then we had the Vice President of the National Hindu Students Forum, Akshaya, join us to facilitate a session with quite a pioneer in the UK Indian art scene, Meera Kaushik OBE, who's the founder of the Munch UK platform. And Meeraji has this really striking aesthetic. You know, she's very unapologetic about wearing a very large bindi on her head. Every time I've ever seen her in public, she wears it proudly. And so they had a really interesting discussion, not only about their shared interest and passion for dance, and how, you know, the feminine is depicted through traditional Indian art dance forms, but also Meeraji's aesthetic and why she's chosen to commit to having such a striking look. And they had a really quite fun running sort of, you know, Meeraji shared a story about the evolution of her bindi over the years and how it's become bolder and bolder. So there's definitely a session to recap if you didn't tune into it live.
Definitely. And then we started day 3 kind of in the corporate world, where, you know, a lot of people spend their times virtually, if not physically, at the moment. And we had a corporate lunch session with part of the PwC Hindu network, so Bayal Shah and Nidhi Vora, just talking about the challenges of climbing the corporate ladder and experiences that they've both been through.
Yeah, I think that was definitely one for graduates and you know, those new to the corporate world. That was really a good one for them to tune into. And then directly after that, we had a graduate masterclass with Hirul Shah, who is the head of UK debt structuring at Barclays. And she gave a really refreshing session on bringing your whole self to work. Something I wish I'd been told when I was first, you know, working in the city, because we have a tendency to sort of hide those parts of ourselves, and I think for those graduates that missed out on that session, definitely go back and tune into that one.
And, you know, I would say, as someone who's never worked in the corporate world, never worked in the city, you know, my working career has always been in the kind of third sector, higher education sector, that sort of thing. Those principles carry through. I think it's part of the baggage that we have, I think, as perhaps, you know, second, third generation Hindu Indian people living in this country, is that, you know, find me one of us who hasn't had to walk some kind of tightrope between the two cultures that we live within, and how sometimes it can be really easy to partition off and just kind of go, okay, well, this is work me, this is what I do, and then there's the rest of me in my personal life. And so it's not just the corporate world, I think it's all of us who have tried to find a way to balance out those two sides. And I think that anyone will find that interesting, corporate world or not, how you can bring your whole self and all the values that you hold into whatever work that you do.
She used anecdotes from the Bhagavad Gita to illustrate points about leadership, which I think is just that beautiful intersection between the two worlds. And then we went into kind of your wheelhouse, because we had a creative session led by fashion consultant, but also poet, Balika Su. Yep, she goes by Words by P on Instagram, and she runs these interactive guided writing sessions. And in this session, she showed us some flash poetry and prompted writing activities that really helped us reflect on our identities as Hindu women. Really, I think even just the smallest prompts can take you into a really, you know, immersive world of ideas and thoughts. So if ever you've got sort of 40 minutes to yourself, I definitely recommend tuning back into that one, sitting there with a pen and pad.
And if you are someone who's been inspired by that and you are going to sit down and do something creative, then stick with us, because we're going to come back to that later, and how you can share some of that creativity back with us and the festival.
Yes, exactly. Then we had a discussion between Sneha Purohit and Sri Priya Chaitanya Ji from the Chinmaya Mission about her really extraordinary and unique journey into becoming a brahmacharini. She grew up very much like the rest of us in the West, and could have easily gone on the trajectory like the rest of us into the working world and in keeping our Hindu identity in a very personal one, but she walked a unique path into giving it all up, giving up the material world to become a sannyasi, to become a brahmacharini. So that was a really interesting one, I think, for all of us to learn from those life lessons.
Definitely, and I think speaks back to that, that earlier session on empowerment and how actually, as a woman, empowerment can take many different forms. What it's mainly about is you being able to have agency over your life and the ability to make choices. And some of those choices can be drastically different between two women sitting side by side.
We had Bhavin Patak, MBE, and Daksha Rahul, both from Bhavin Ji from the York Foundation and Daksha Ji from Seva Day, talking about the concept of seva. This Hindu-inspired concept that transcends all identities to serve society, and how it can't just be translated into volunteering or charity, but it is so much more than that. So a really inspiring discussion about the contributions of women to society and various seva initiatives that run throughout the UK.
Yeah, and then, speaking about women who contribute to society, the final session that day was a really great conversation between Tejo Pankania and Reena Anand about just that sort of woman, right?
Yeah, a great visionary of India, Vandana Shiva, and some of the challenges that life threw at her, and how she, holding her dharma very much in her heart, managed to overcome that and lead thousands of women worldwide through holding a cause in their heart. And Reena wrote a book about this last year, which published with Tattva Press, which you can buy at tattva.org.uk. So be sure to read about her life and experiences by purchasing the book there. So then, yeah.
Day 4 then was, we started that a bit active.
Yeah. Yes, we were joined by Shivali Shukla from Hyderabad, who joined one of our resident yogis, Tejo Pankania, and they delivered a really lovely kind of morning yogasan, pranayam, hatha yoga session, and they really spoke about some of the benefits to women and some asanas and practices that are especially relevant and beneficial for women. So again, when you have some time to yourself and you've got a mat or even just some flat ground, be sure to tune into that session, recap and follow along.
Definitely. And then kind of a nice kind of lead on from that was the holistic wellbeing workshop from Jyoti Jadhav. And I think, I do think that we're only just beginning to understand kind of in modern Western society the importance in looking at our well-being holistically. Like, it's not just that you have your physical health and that you treat medical conditions when they arise. We've also got we need to look at our lives in their entirety. And I think Jyoti was talking about a lot of actual sort of ancient principles around that have been in our culture for such a long time that we've sort of lost touch with.
Yeah,
and that we can all bring back.
And practically, she just dropped so many gems about cyclical living, and she made some real passing statements like that our menstrual cycles are linked with the moon cycle. And like in my head, she just said it. I was like, of course it is. It's a 28-day cycle. Of course there's some sort of connection. And she really went through some of the sort of do's and don'ts during various stages of your menstrual cycle that I'll definitely be implementing. There's certain things I just did not know about myself. I just sort of mentioned, we just go through it every month and we don't really bother to get any insight into it. And Jyoti just completely taught me so much about myself in just the space of an hour. So yeah, definitely recommend going back to view that one. Then we had a jam-packed day of sessions. It was the Saturday, it was the 4th day of the festival. We heard from Falguni Bhatt from Bal Gokulam and Prithvi Trivedi, a digital marketing manager and an artist who you can look up on Instagram, art by Prithvi. And they spoke about how the feminine is depicted in art across cultures and what that shows about how women were respected throughout history across cultures.
And I would say, and keep an eye on things, and we'll give you some information later. But again, Prithvi's putting some really interesting stuff together that we'll be putting out later on that explores this topic even more. And then we had an intergenerational Q&A session.
Yeah, I know that this was a fan favorite. This was a big favorite. We had some great feedback on this one. We had 14-year-old Simran Solanki joining, Dr. Vidula Ambekar, who is a senior leader for the community. And Simran was just asking some really candid questions about, why so many people around me get married. Why should I get married? And all sorts, about the world that Vidulaji's generation is leaving behind, and how Simran's upcoming generation, can use those values. What sort of world should we be creating with the next generation? What sort of world is she entering?
And I'd just like to say, I would tell everyone to just, this festival in a few years' time, Simran's going to be running it. Like, she just
facilitate all of the panels.
That's it.
Yeah,
she's going to. I tell you,
great.
I guarantee you, she'll be running this festival in a few years' time.
You heard it here first, guys. Then we had a big sort of panel discussion engaging speakers from India as well as the UK. We had Abhilasha from Vicharmanthan facilitating a discussion with Nitin Sridhar, who is one of the curators from the Advaita Academy, joined by Manu Kajuri again from Voice of Dogras, and Shweta Mohanty from the Friends of India International. And they spoke about, quite interestingly, and something that's quite out of character for an event all about women, they spoke about the role of men in society and dharma. What is their responsibility, what are their rights, and what are their duties in this society to bring this vision to life? Because this isn't just about what women are doing and what women are about. We're much more cohesive as a community, as a perspective. Dharma is all about, I mentioned this in the opening, and I'll say it again. Sadhguru says that, the masculine and feminine are in complete collaboration. It is only in the human mind that there is conflict. So this festival is as much about men as it is about women. And so this was a really integral discussion between 4 thought leaders on this.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think again, it's something that we've sort of almost forgotten about our own culture, is the idea that the masculine and the feminine, they're completely intertwined in the philosophy of what our culture is about. And I think we need to reclaim that. And also just, on a more serious note, we're living in the UK at a time when there have been some quite atrocious crimes recently in the sphere of violence against women. And it sparked a big conversation, that a lot of men will put their hands up and say, well, it's not all men, it's not me. And the conversation has now become about, well, it might not be you doing a bad thing, but what are the positive things that you're doing? How are you getting involved in the conversation to make sure that society is more equitable, and that women are not having to endure things that they shouldn't be? And so I felt really timely to have this discussion and to have this conversation about what men can be doing for the kind of the female cause, as it were.
Brilliant, yeah. Then we heard from Jazz Kaur Sharma, who has recently written an essay called Women Tradition in India, which many of us who have read From Beyond the Bindi have been really wowed by, and used it as a basis of a great many discussions and workshops. And it's a really, I keep using the word candid, but this whole festival is, in a word, very candid. It was very real. And it was, we were speaking to real people with real experiences. And Jazz's experience was that of, like many, I'm sure many of those watching can relate to, really disregarding traditions from a young age, really not seeing it as having a space in our very British world. And then after getting married, her sort of really realizing the value of those traditions.
Well, I think also it wasn't even just after she got married. I think it was more that she realized that there were a lot of traditions that were being followed that were just not, the meaning behind them had been completely lost. And then they were just becoming things that people were doing for the sake of doing them. And then they were getting distorted and not adapting. And, you know, we come from a culture where it's all about, like you say, diversity and adapting and changing and understanding the context that you're in. And I think that for me is what really stuck out about that conversation that Jazz and Pavan had, and the writing that Jazz has done before, is that tradition doesn't have to be a bad word, but if you're going to have traditions, you have to understand what they're there for. Yeah. I think that really
she debunks some of the negative connotations and stereotypes behind some of the things that we've just come to disregard, and show the real value of them in our modern lives, in modern society.
And then we went back to the arts.
Yes. Akshaya again joined us to facilitate a discussion with the founder of the Bija Dance Academy, and Nusha Subramaniam, all about how the feminine is depicted in Bharatanatyam and classical Indian dance forms. I know that will really help Akshaya's research into this sector, and she as well is contributing to the Beyond the Bindi anthology with sort of her research into dance and classical Indian dance. So stick around for her sort of research journey on that.
Yeah. And then we kind of moved on to a few topics, you know, to close off the day 4, that for many people would be a bit uncomfortable to talk about. And so we had Devika Gina talking to Dr. Chinmaya Anand on the subject that seen as largely taboo, which is sex, and specifically the mistranslations of Kama Sutra, and what that as a text is actually all about, and how that ties into the wider Hindu philosophy about the idea of pleasure, and why it is a core part of the philosophy of Hindu Dharma, but has been completely misunderstood because this one text has been so misconstrued and mistranslated, and how there's a huge amount of power for women within the philosophy that is around pleasure, and that's been lost in so many ways. And one of the things that really stuck out for me was that at the same time that the Kama Sutra was being written in India, talking about this really open idea of pleasure in many different forms being a route to enlightenment, you know, kind of the Catholic Church at the same time was writing doctrines that were saying that pleasure was a path to hell, and that so many things should be outlawed. And I just found it so refreshing to hear this conversation. And it's really interesting because the idea of mistranslation, the idea of, you know, our language of Sanskrit, but also the way in which that language is used in metaphors, for example, you know, that's come up a lot in a number of the talks, and that the mistranslation between that core language and the English that we use now has created so many misconceptions.
Yeah, and it really brings to light again that there's this idea that we have to be the torchbearers that put in the work to understand these. It's not enough for us to just say that they've been mistranslated, but let's put in the research, let's incubate, let's really make sure that we find the most credible sources of information if we're going to take the responsibility of representing it.
Yeah.
And then again, another controversial topic that our authors are just not holding back with, and are, you know, completely bringing them to the forefront. It was Shivani Patel and Vibhuti
Shivani Bala.
Shivani Bala.
Can I just say, disclaimer, I know she and I are like best friends, but you can't interchange our surnames.
That's exactly what it is. Shivani Bala, I'm sorry, misspoke. And Vibhuti Patani were talking about breaking the cycle, it bloody matters. All about Shivani's journey into going from, struggling with the Indian ideas around menstrual cycle and some of the practices and rituals, all the way through to really going on that journey that we've been speaking about, doing, digging, putting in the work to find the most credible information about it, and moving from skepticism to amazement, and seeing the value of those rituals and traditions around menstrual practices in India.
Yeah, definitely. We'll come back to that because Shivani did another session later on as well. But again, bear with us and we'll tell you about how you can keep in touch with things that are going on, because Shivani is putting together a really incredible piece of writing for the anthology on this topic. And I think it will be really interesting for a lot of us to read.
Gosh, I'm tired of talking about these sessions now, and just to think that we've not even got up to day 5 yet, but we kicked off this morning with a session with Lavina Mehta MBE and Dr. Harish Nakam, all about the benefits of fitness beyond the gym, and Lavina's initiatives to, especially in a post-pandemic world, to get the community really active and moving again. And she's been joined, she was recently honored by the Queen with an MBE for her services to not only British society, but internationally, in helping us stay active and healthy over lockdown. And she was joined by her mother-in-law on many of these sessions, free sessions, may I add, that are all available on YouTube. She was joined by her mother-in-law, who's translating them into Gujarati. So really taking all the barriers away from access to physical
definitely
exercise.
because I think there will be, I think fitness has been a really important part of this last year for me, for my mental health as well as my physical health. I think staying fit and active, but I think that there can be a real kind of generational divide, and I think that perhaps our mother's generation can sometimes sort of cut off from that world of health and fitness that we probably
take for granted
without even thinking about it. And then I think I think that this kind of initiative is really important.
Then we had another masterclass work-life workshop with Raki Shah from Fertility Bump and Beyond. Really, again, like Jyoti's session, telling us about ourselves, about our fertility, how to either get or avoid pregnancy, how to, monitor our physical systems, and to be able to really know more about ourselves in a way that we're not otherwise taught. So really enlightening session there.
And then we were in the kitchen.
Oh yes.
And I was literally in the kitchen.
What I love about this cooking masterclass that we had with Shohini Banerjee from Smoke and Lime, of course the cooking and all the eating that went with her cooking her Bengali inspired potato and tomato chutney recipe, but also that Shohini has these really interesting ideas about how we as a society have almost removed these expressions of femininity like cooking and nurturing from our perspective, from our narratives, and we've almost gone so far the other way that we don't experience the joy of actually of being, of cooking, of those expressions.
And I think the thing that was really interesting in the conversation that we were having whilst trying not to burn off food was that it was that idea of choice again and expectation. I actually think it was one of the guys that said it. I think maybe Raghav or Bhavin said it, but the problem becomes when you expect all of those types of tasks to be done by women in a household, but actually when they become something that you do out of love and not out of choice. And actually, like I said, we have Bhavin and Raghav on that in that class as well. It's actually not about the gender, it's about the joy and the experience of the cooking and the food and the feeding people. And so once you remove that idea of expectation that only women should be in the kitchen, the experience becomes something completely.
Yeah. And Raghav loved the Jordan Guzar potatoes so much. I think he's cooked them again today.
He's cooked them again. Wow, yeah. I've still got some left over to eat.
I can't wait to try them next time we meet up, when we can again, which isn't too far away, is it? Fingers crossed. And then moving on to our final sessions of the festival, we're joined by Pandit Satish Kumar Sharma about his recent book that he's published, Caste Conversion, a Colonial Conspiracy. And Niti Rao from Vichar spoke to him about the caste system, why it is that he refers to it as a hate crime against the Hindu civilization. He also speaks a lot about how it is something that all Hindus and Christians must know. She really picked and probed at some of the insights from his book and his research over the years, into why we as a community, as a civilization, should be eradicating it from our consciousness. And it's not something that we should be owning or expending any more energy on, because it is of great harm to us as a civilization.
Yeah, I can't, if you missed that session, I can't recommend enough, not just his session, anything that Satish does. You know, he's so articulate in talking about things that can seem like very dense, complex philosophical subjects, or about our ancient history. And he can explain them in a way that makes them so accessible, and you can understand, you know, these are the issues, and this is what the philosophy says, and this is what we should be thinking about. So yeah, if you miss that, please go back.
Yeah, he was definitely one of the thought leaders and the voices from the Hindu community that we were quite honored to have as part of this festival, along with Sinu Joseph, who was part of the next session of the festival, who's written extensively about menstruation and the place of women in Hindu society, but most notably for her book Ritu Vidya, about the ancient science behind menstrual practices. And Shivani Bala from the previous session about menstruation joined us again to facilitate that discussion. And that was a really in-depth, really passionate and powerful session, all about some of those rituals. And I know that Shivani was completely fangirling the whole way through, because she's just finished the book.
I think that's okay. And I think, you know, again, you can be a really taboo subject, but, you know, and Shivani and I have talked about this because she's developing this piece of writing for the anthology, but as we talk about the fact that there's this whole idea of, you know, it being seen as taboo, but actually sometimes the problem that we have in the West is that, you know, half the population is expected to just go through something that we all go through every 28 days without acknowledging that it actually even happens, and that our bodies go through so much in that space of time. And so for some women, it is almost unendurable. And I think that by pretending it doesn't exist, we're almost doing as much harm as the idea of casting women aside because of what's happening. And so, I mean, another fascinating conversation, and really, really relevant to us here.
Yeah, and also that we are not an authority, again, by being from the West. And, and she even says, like, you know, the women in the rural parts of India know what they're doing. They've had these practices as part of their, as part of their traditions for centuries, if not longer. Like, we don't, just because we've come up with the sanitary towel or the tampon doesn't mean that they need that. You know, and more of our more sustainable charities in the West are now coming towards utilizing their practices. It's not just because we're from the West that we have a superior knowledge. Maybe there's a thing or two for us to learn from the way that they practice things out there in a more primitive way. Yeah. Come back full circle. And then we moved on to our final three panels of the festival. Again, going back down to the south of India, hearing from Manju Stalin from the Sangamam UK Foundation, hearing all about Tamil practices, how women are perceived in Tamil culture. And that was facilitated by Dr. Rishi Handa, who is a Sanskrit scholar and a great portal of wisdom, and has spent a lot of time really immersing himself in Tamil practices over the years and Tamil culture. So he was really apt for that discussion. So yeah, it was great to have Sangamam UK as part of the festival too.
Definitely. And then we had Bobbin Taylor back again, recurring star of the festival. And this time he was talking to Dr. Tina Mistry about parenthood. Yeah.
And Tina Mistry is one of the co-founders of Another Mother Story. And Pooja Patel, the other co-founder, had been in a discussion with Sumit Sharma from the VM podcast earlier in the festival about the meaning of marriage and rituals and the Vivas and Scar. And I think both of them in their various sessions really managed to convey the sentiments behind Another Mother Story, and that project about documenting experiences of women. And so, yeah, Bobbin and Tina spoke quite openly and honestly about perceptions of parenthood, about fatherlessness, motherlessness, and the impact of that in a child's development, which led us on perfectly to the final session of the festival, which was about motherhood and child development between three Shahs, as Hina flaunted it. Hina, one of the directors of Event Gurus, was with Sunitha Shah, a speech and language therapist and the founder of the JJ's book series, and Dr. Meera Shah, about the challenges around motherhood. And they spoke very frankly, openly, and very courageously about some of the personal challenges that they faced, from terminal illnesses to IVF to miscarriage. And I think that was a real game-changing discussion, as I know that when Meera has spoken on previous events for us as a platform, we've had so much feedback to say, gosh, it was so game-changing for me to hear her speak that way, because it just makes me feel so much more comfortable being able to speak about these topics. So real thank you to those three for really being so candid and open about their own personal experiences.
Yeah, I think so. I think it would have helped a lot of people to know that perhaps experiences that they haven't been able to talk about are ones that are shared with other people.
So as we said, these are all accessible on the internet, on our YouTube channel at the Hindu Women's Festival, so you can recap them at your own leisure and convenience. But that's not all. We've got one final treat in store for you today. We've been joined by one of our authors who are contributing to the Beyond the Bindi anthology to speak to you a little bit about a topic that wasn't covered in the festival. But as we've said, this festival was not a finality. We were not providing the absolute conclusion on Hindu views to do with femininity and womanhood. This is a conversation starter. We've got a lot to talk about, a lot left to learn and to write about. So we're joined by Reena Anand, one of the authors who is writing about bringing up a child with autism and her journey through motherhood. So welcome, Reena, to the closing ceremony of the Hindu Women's Festival 2021.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's really nice to have you here, Reena. And, you know, a big part of this festival has been getting authentic perspectives from people. Like Vidhu said, we're not being authorities on anything, but we're really trying to show the breadth of experience of what that label, being a Hindu woman, can mean, and particularly can mean in Britain today. And you're one of our contributing authors to the anthology that we're putting together, Beyond the Bindi. And just wanted you to tell us a little bit about your story and the perspective that you're providing.
Yeah, of course. So I have two children. My eldest son is 7 and he's autistic. And I think that the journey of the diagnosis is, you know, it's something I'll be writing quite a lot about. It's hard enough. But I think one of the things that made it very challenging is that I didn't know anybody in my community, in my family, who was autistic. I didn't know what to expect, but there is no literal translation of the word autism, and any substitute phrases and words are actually quite negative. And it was really, really important to me that for me, culture is really important. My religion is really important. And just because my son sees the world differently, there's no reason why he shouldn't be part of the community, take part in events and festivals, and learn about our culture. And so I guess ever since I got the diagnosis, and I also saw the reaction of my family and friends in the community, made them very uncomfortable, because people in our community, from my experience, don't talk openly about any sort of issues that with their children. When my husband decided to do a marathon for the Autistic Society, his parents asked him not to put the sponsorship page on Facebook, because then our wider friends and family would know that our son's autistic. They were really worried. So there's this whole thing about perception, what will people think? And there was even a part of, is it because of something maybe I ate, the wrong foods when I was pregnant and all these sorts of things. And people hypothesize a lot. Yeah. But they don't want to ask openly. And so I guess I'm a bit on a mission to just share my journey through writing of parenting an autistic child, and also show, yes, okay, what the challenges are, but actually how I'm overcoming them, because I'd like to empower other women in the community to not just celebrate their children and their neurodiversity, but actually feel empowered to ask for help, because it's tough. And you're not alone, but if you are made to feel like you're the only one, actually you're doing yourself and your child quite a disservice, really, and that's not right.
That's really inspiring, Reena, and I think that, and I don't use that term lightly, because that sense that you felt that you were alone when you got that diagnosis about your child, that you didn't know who to turn to that would have the same cultural perspective as you and understand those particular challenges. You won't be the only parent out there who's faced that. And I think that it's incredible that you're prepared to put that story out there and put your experiences out there, and actually that positive story about how you're overcoming all of those challenges to give yourself and your child the most positive outcome. I think that will be so important for other parents to read, and we're really excited to have you on board and to have you telling that story with us. In terms of actually sort of telling the story side of it, tell us a bit about that experience. But because obviously I have a draft of your piece and we're working on it together.
Yeah.
What was that like, taking all of those experiences, some things that probably would have been quite difficult and challenging for you, and putting that down on paper to tell your story to people? What was that process like?
I think it's quite healing, actually, and I don't think I didn't expect that. That was like a pleasant byproduct of writing, but it was quite healing to put it all out there. But I think a big driver for me is, I think I very much think about, when I leave this world, people aren't going to remember me necessarily for that long, but actually, what is it? What is my legacy? What will I leave behind that will inspire for generations to come? And so I guess my writing is very much written as if I'm just talking to you, talking you through how I got the diagnosis, what my, battles were, but also quite practical things. So, for example, I want to take my son to weddings. I want to take him to pool jazz. I want to take him to things, but there are certain environments which are not conducive for him, or because of his auditory and sensory issues, but others which can be, if I'm open to sharing with the hosts what I need and how I've gone about that. So it's not just a very academic piece of writing. It's not intended to be. It's very much intended to be look, this is my journey, this is how I've gone through it, and this is how I'm making sure that my son is not hidden away, and that actually I am exposing him to all the richness of our culture and life and what life has to offer, by sharing those practical examples.
That point is so right. Is that why should your child miss out on his cultural heritage and the culture that he's been born into just because people aren't used to talking about what he's living with and the fact that he just sees the world in a different way?
Yeah.
I think that's really amazing, because the easy thing to do would be to just completely pull back, wouldn't it, from that, and just say, okay, well, I'm not engaging with this cultural aspect because it doesn't understand where I'm coming from. And I think that's quite amazing, that you've made that commitment to say, no, I want my child to be connected to his culture. I'm going to find a way to bring people on board with me and give him that. That's really quite incredible. Okay, finally, I suppose I would just say, what would you say to other people? So we're going to make a little bit of, we're going to talk in a little bit about how people can join us in this conversation that we've started through this festival. What would you say to people out there who might be like you were when we first sort of reached out to you, or we first got in contact with you, who might think, well, I've got an interesting experience, and it's, it's connected to my Hindu identity, but it's not been touched upon in this festival, or I've never seen anybody tell a story like this before, but I'm not sure if it's something that I should do. What would you say to them?
Honestly, I think even if you had 5 people writing about the same thing, each of those 5 voices would be so unique and the perspective would be so beautiful that you know, even if it's one of the topics, for example, covered in this festival, or even covered in, you know, they might seemingly seem to be covered by something else in the anthology, I'd say don't let that put you off. And I think for me, initially when I was approached, I was like, oh, well, this is just my life, you know, how can it really be that interesting? And then when I sat down to actually write it, and then also because I have a blog where I share my experiences and anecdotes from my life of parenting an autistic child, you know, the feedback is so positive. So I would just say to people, every single story is so valid because it's unique and it's yours, and no one else can tell it the way you tell it. So don't think, I think for me, if I had this conversation with myself at the beginning, it would be, don't think about the end, like what will it look like and how will I get there? Just think about narrating it to yourself or as if to someone close to you, and just write it and try to avoid editing as you write, because I think that I've never got to the point where I'm 100% happy with anything I've ever written. So I would say just write it, just do it, and yeah, don't think about the end goal, because there's so much support along the way to help refine, you know, the structure and the angle and this and that, and but no one can replicate your unique voice. So yeah,
and
share it. And I don't think
completion of an idea is so much better than a perfect one.
Exactly.
And here at Beyond the Bindi, you have a support system that is joining you on that journey, that is checking in with you, helping you take your research further, connecting you with the right thought leaders.
Yes.
And then we've got our amazing editor-in-chief, Vibhuti Patel, who's spending hours on end sifting through, editing it, telling you where you've not only sort of on in terms of the content and how it's put together, but also she will definitely pull you up on all those missing full stops and apostrophes and the rest of it. So
I do like a good semicolon used. Actually. I'm just saying.
So that brings us on to our main sort of calls to action from this event. Thank you so much,
Reena,
for joining us. But wow, what an amazing and inspiring sort of story, and one that, as we haven't covered in the festival, but something that we're definitely going to be proudly and loudly shouting about over the next few months up until the launch of the book. The festival included cross-generational dialogues between teenagers and veterans, conversations around sex, sexuality, fertility, motherhood, the role of men, caste, traditions. We had interactive sessions on writing, yoga, holistic well-being. 1,000 delegates signed up. How do we make use of this energy that we've cultivated and generated throughout these last 5 years? Like 5 years, 5 days. It feels like 5 years.
That's a Freudian slip.
But like, what is next?
What is next is that what we hope we've done is start a conversation, not close it. You know, like you said, Vidhu, right at the beginning, this was never about showcasing or acting as an authority. We just wanted to present some ideas, some thoughts, some authentic perspectives. And we wanted it to open a conversation about these different aspects of what it means to be a Hindu woman, you know, living in Britain, having different experiences. And so we want to hear about those. You know, we want you, all of you out there watching this, tell us your story, tell us your perspective, tell us what you're thinking about, tell us where this festival has taken you in terms of your understanding of our culture, your experiences, anything else that it sparked. That's what we want, really. We want to stay in touch with you, and we want to keep the conversation going.
There are 3 main calls to action from this festival. Number 1, for you at home, I want you all right this moment to get onto your device and to type in hinduwomen'sfestival.org. And if you hadn't already signed up and you managed to get a dodgy link from somewhere, I want you all to register to attend. Now, I know that sounds really counterintuitive and weird because we're finishing the festival, but this will add you onto our newsletter list, which we won't be spamming you with loads of emails, no, not at all, but we will be keeping you up to date on all of the publishing and research opportunities that we'll have available to you over the next couple of weeks. And we're planning to host a regular video/book club where we discuss ideas. We continue to incubate them in a more intimate setting than the last 5 days have been, and really taking you from inception of an idea all the way through to the end, sort of not just publishing the idea, but becoming a thought leader on these ideas around femininity and womanhood. So if you have an idea, we'd love you to sign up to join us as part of these intimate sessions, and to, you know, continue your research and inquiry into Hindu ideas around femininity and womanhood. The second call to action is that you go to the Get Involved tab on the website and you fill out the first form, which is all about your feedback. So your feedback from this event: what is it that we did right? What is it that you want to hear more of, or who is it that you want to hear more from? What is it that we missed? Like, what were some of the things that we need to cover in our inquiry? Maybe some of the topics that you think are really important. You know, have your say, submit your feedback, be as critical and as open as possible, so that we can really refine our research and our process to make sure that we fulfill this project Beyond the Bindi with the utmost integrity and justice. And then number 3, there is another section just underneath that feedback form where you can submit your ideas or your analysis of one of the sessions, even if it's just 100 words. By getting in touch and sharing your idea, you can be featured on our online platform, which can then lead on to publishing opportunities later on down the line, even in the anthology.
Yeah, and I would say that don't worry about whether you think you're a writer or not a writer. You know, don't worry about that. If you have a story that you want to tell, like Reena said, even if it's a story that someone else has told, this is your perspective on that story. Don't worry about whether you see yourself as a writer or not. It's the stories that we're interested in, and there are lots of different ways that those stories can be told. So just please do get in touch and tell us.
Thank you so much to the whole team that was involved in the back end of this whole big operation. We had Rajiv and Raghav and Harsha and Krishna looking after all the newsletters and social media and all the sort of back end of the videos and editing and live streaming and the rest of it. It really wouldn't have been possible without the entire Beyond the Bindi team, the Tattva Press Network, and the entire community that have really come forward and collaborated with us with such ease. This really is the start of something, and we hope you will join us on this journey of Beyond the Bindi. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to working with you in the very near future. Namaste.
Namaste.